The day my mother looked me in the eyes and said she did not recognize me anymore was the day I understood that some lies go so deep, the person telling them starts to believe they are real. I had spent 4 years being the one who showed up. 4 years of early mornings, unanswered calls, hospital waiting rooms, insurance paperwork, grocery runs, and quiet dinners with a woman who was slowly forgetting my name but never once forgot my sister Priya's birthday. I was not angry about that. I told myself I was not angry about any of it. I just kept showing up, kept paying, kept carrying the weight because someone had to, and I was Nadia. That was what Nadia did. Then one Thursday afternoon, Priya sat down across from my mother at that small kitchen table, the same table I had wiped clean 100 times, and told her that I had been taking money from her account. She said it calmly. She said it with her hands folded. She said it like she had practiced it. And my mother, who had forgotten what year it was, remembered enough to cry. Before I tell you what happened next, I want to ask you something real. If the person who was supposed to have your back was the same person spreading lies about you to everyone who mattered, how long would you have stayed quiet? Because Nadia stayed quiet for a very long time. And I need you to understand exactly why before you judge the moment she finally stopped. My name is Nadia. I am 34 years old. At the time the story begins, I was living 40 minutes away from my childhood home in a small apartment I rented alone, working as an administrative coordinator at a medical billing company, and spending roughly 3 weekends a month driving back to that house on Clement Street to take care of my mother, Delia. My mother had been diagnosed with early-stage vascular dementia 2.5 years before any of this happened. She was 67, she was not completely lost yet. She had good days and she had bad days. On good days, she could tell you what she had for breakfast, remember the name of the neighbor across the street, and laugh at the television. On bad days, she forgot she had already eaten, called me by my aunt's name, and sometimes stood in the hallway looking at the wall like she was waiting for someone who was never going to arrive. My sister Priya was 39. She lived 20 minutes closer to our mother than I did. She had a husband named Desmond, 2 kids who were in middle school, a house with a mortgage that had been quietly struggling for years, and a way of talking about our mother's care that made it sound like she was deeply involved without ever actually being present. She would send texts. She would call on Sundays sometimes. She would tell our relatives at every family gathering that she and Nadia were taking such good care of mom, holding together beautifully, and that mom was lucky to have daughters like them. What she did not mention at those gatherings was that I was the one who had set up my mother's direct deposit to go into a joint account that I managed because my mother had started forgetting to pay her own utility bills and had once sent a check for $800 to a sweepstakes company she thought was the government. What she did not mention was that I had spent my own savings building a small safety cushion for my mother's medical expenses. What she did not mention was that Priya had not visited our mother for 11 weeks before the Thursday afternoon. She sat down at that kitchen table and told my mother I was stealing from her. I found out about that conversation 3 days later. I found out not from my mother, who had mostly forgotten the details by then, but from our Aunt Curran, who called me on a Sunday evening while I was making dinner. Aunt Curran was my father's older sister. She was a woman who had always prided herself on delivering information calmly, which meant she never raised her voice but always made sure you felt the full weight of every word. She told me that Priya had called her, that Priya had also called our cousin Mehak, that Priya had called the family pastor. That Priya had told each of them individually that she was very worried because she had discovered irregularities in the account that managed our mother's money, and that she believed Nadia had been making withdrawals that could not be explained. I remember standing in my kitchen with the spoon still in my hand, the water boiling behind me, and feeling something I can only describe as a cold stillness. Not anger, not panic. Just a very slow, very clear recognition that something enormous had been set in motion and I had not been told it was coming. I asked Aunt Curran what exactly Priya had said. Aunt Curran told me Priya had used the phrase misappropriation of funds. She had also said she was considering her legal options. She had also cried on the phone. Aunt Curran said Priya had sounded very believable. She paused after she said that, and I understood the pause. She was telling me she was not sure what to think. She was telling me that Priya had already gotten there first. I told Aunt Curran I would send her the account statements. Every single one from the day the joint account was opened to that morning. Aunt Curran said that would be helpful. She said it in the way that people say things when they are already half decided and are giving you a chance to change their mind out of fairness. I hung up the phone and stood there for a long time. The water boiled over. I turned off the stove. I sat down on my kitchen floor, not dramatically, not in collapse, but because I needed to be closer to the ground for a minute. I needed to think from a place that felt solid. Here is what I knew. The joint account had been opened 18 months prior at my mother's doctor's recommendation because managing her own finances had become genuinely unsafe for her. The doctor had written it in a letter. My mother had agreed. We had gone to the bank together, my mother and I, and she had signed the paperwork herself on one of her better days. Every withdrawal from that account had a corresponding receipt, invoice, or explanation logged in a simple spreadsheet I kept on my laptop. Medication, groceries, the home health aide who came 3 mornings a week, a plumber who had fixed a leak in the bathroom, my mother's property tax installment, her phone bill, her electricity. Every single transaction was documented because I had known from the very first day that managing someone else's money made you vulnerable to exactly this kind of accusation. I had known. I had prepared. I thought that preparation would be enough. What I did not fully understand yet was that Priya had not just made a phone call. Priya had been quietly building a case for weeks, and the case was not built from facts. The case was built from the kind of small, selective storytelling that is almost impossible to disprove in a family setting because it does not rely on evidence. It relies on reputation, emotion, and the very human tendency to believe the person who is crying over the person who is calm. The next morning I called Priya. She did not answer. I texted her and said I needed to talk to her about what she had told Aunt Curran. She replied 2 hours later with 4 words. Call me when you're. That was it, not an apology, not a clarification, not even a denial, just that careful, positioned phrase that made it sound like I was the one who owed something. I called her that evening. She answered on the second ring, which told me she had been waiting. She sounded measured. She sounded like she had thought about what she was going to say. She told me that she was not trying to start a fight. She said she was worried about Mom. She said she had noticed some things that concerned her and she felt like she had a responsibility to say something to the family. I asked her directly, did she believe I had stolen from our mother? She paused just long enough to make the silence do work for her. Then she said she did not want to use that word. She said she thought there might have been some poor judgment. She said maybe things had gotten muddled without anyone meaning harm. Poor judgment. Muddled without anyone meaning harm. She had chosen every word carefully to make a serious accusation sound like a gentle concern. She was not backing down, but she was dressing the accusation in soft language so that if I pushed back, I would be the one who sounded aggressive. I told her I had documentation for every single transaction. I told her I would send it to her tonight. She said that would be great, that she just wanted to understand, that of course she trusted me, she was just trying to protect Mom. She was just trying to protect Mom. That sentence lodged in my chest like something sharp. I sent the spreadsheet that night. I attached 43 receipts, 12 invoices, the doctor's letter recommending the joint account, the bank account agreement, and a one-page summary I wrote myself that explained each major expense category and the total amounts. I was thorough, clear, and professional. I wrote a cover email that was polite and not defensive because I knew that defensiveness would be used against me. Priya read the email. She responded the next morning. She said, thank you for sending this. She said she would take a look. She said she hoped we could get on the same page for Mom's sake. She did not say she was satisfied. She did not say she understood. She did not say she was going to correct what she had told the family. I waited 3 days. Nothing changed. Aunt Curran did not call back. Cousin Mehak, who I usually spoke to every couple of weeks, went quiet. The family pastor, whom I had known my whole life, sent me a text asking how I was doing that felt suddenly formal in a way it never had before. The shape of the silence told me exactly what was happening. Priya had distributed her story and my spreadsheet had been distributed in return. The facts were sitting in Priya's inbox and the feelings were sitting in everyone else's hearts. This is one of the cruelest things about being falsely accused by someone inside your own family. The accusation travels fast because it is interesting. The proof travels slow because it is boring. Drama moves, documentation sits. I drove to my mother's house that weekend. I needed to see her. I also needed to see the house because something Priya had said during our phone call had snagged in my memory and I had been turning it over ever since. Priya had mentioned almost casually that she had stopped by Mom's house last week. She said she had noticed the front garden looking overgrown and the side gate had been left open. At the time I thought she was just making conversation about the house. But by the time I pulled into the driveway that Saturday morning, I had started to wonder if stopping by was really all she had done. My mother was in the living room watching a cooking show when I arrived. She was having a decent morning. She smiled when she saw me and remembered my name, which was one of those small moments that never stopped feeling like a gift. I made her breakfast and sat with her and we talked about nothing particular for a while. The home health aide, a gentle woman named Gloria who came 3 mornings a week, had left a note on the refrigerator about my mother's medication schedule and a reminder that the next doctor appointment was in 10 days. Everything looked normal. I was in the small back office, going through the file cabinet where I kept paper copies of important documents when I noticed something. The file I kept labeled medical correspondence was not in its usual position. It was behind 2 other folders instead of in front where I always left it. The folder itself was not empty or disturbed, but it had been moved. I stood there staring at that file cabinet for a moment, telling myself it was nothing. Files got moved. My mother sometimes opened cabinets. Gloria sometimes looked for things. But then I opened my mother's desk drawer, where I kept a small notebook with the account login information and the contact numbers for the bank, the insurance company, and the doctor's office, and the notebook was not in the back corner where I always kept it. It was lying open in the center of the drawer. Someone had been in this office. Someone had been looking through these files. I did not say anything to my mother about it. I finished my visit, made sure she had everything she needed, confirmed her medication for the day, and drove home. And that night, sitting at my kitchen table, I made a decision that would eventually change everything. I decided I was done waiting to be believed. I decided I was going to protect myself and my mother with the same thoroughness I had been protecting her finances, and I was going to do it quietly before Priya made her next move. The first thing I did was call the bank on Monday morning and ask to be connected to the fraud prevention department. I explained the situation. I told them that another family member had made accusations about the joint account and that I was concerned about unauthorized access to documents related to the account. I asked them to flag any requests for account information that did not come directly from me and to require additional verification. They were helpful and professional. They noted my concerns on the account. The second thing I did was call an estate and elder law attorney named Patricia M. Wangi, whose name I had found through a colleague at work. I had a 1 hour consultation over the phone. I told her everything. The account, the documentation, the calls Priya had made to family members, the disturbed files in my mother's home office. Patricia listened carefully. She asked me whether there was a formal power of attorney arrangement in place for my mother's care. I told her there was not. She told me that was the first thing we needed to address because without a formal legal framework, my position as joint account holder could be challenged by any family member who chose to make a claim. She also asked me if anyone had filed a report. I said not that I knew of. She said to be prepared for the possibility that they might. That word might felt like a window opening onto a very cold room. The third thing I did was drive back to my mother's house that Wednesday when Gloria was there, and I installed 2 security cameras, one in the entryway, one in the small hallway outside the office. I bought them myself. They were modest, not elaborate, the kind you could set up in an afternoon, and they connected to an app on my phone that saved footage to a cloud account. I showed my mother what they were. On that particular day, she was having a cloudier morning, and she smiled and nodded and said it seemed like a good idea without fully following what I was explaining. Gloria asked me about them, and I told her they were for general security, which was true. I also told Gloria that if anyone came to the house while I was not there, anyone at all, she should not be afraid to note the time and who it was. Gloria was a quiet, careful woman. She looked at me steadily and said she understood. I also did one more thing that Wednesday, something small and specific that I would not fully appreciate until many months later. I found the small security camera the building management had installed above the front door of my mother's house 2 years prior, the one that faced the driveway and the street, the one that neither I nor anyone else in the family had ever thought about. I checked it, it was still connected. The building management company had a service that stored footage remotely. I called them and asked how far back the storage went. They told me 90 days. I asked them to note my name as a contact on the account and to hold footage starting from 30 days prior. They said they could flag the account. I did not know yet what was on that footage from the past 30 days, but I had a feeling I was going to want it. The following 2 weeks passed in a kind of muffled tension. On the surface, family life continued. Aunt Curran sent a group text about an upcoming birthday dinner. Mehak posted photos of her garden. Priya sent me a brief message asking if Mom had had her appointment, which I answered factually. Nobody addressed the accusation directly. Nobody said anything had been resolved. The family simply continued doing what families do when something painful is in the room. They talked around it, went through the normal motions, and let the discomfort settle into the background like furniture no one wanted to move. But underneath that surface, things were moving. I just did not know it yet. Patricia, my attorney, had filed paperwork to establish a formal durable power of attorney for my mother's health and financial decisions, with me named as agent and Priya listed as secondary. We scheduled an appointment with my mother and a notary for the following Friday. I had discussed this with my mother on one of her clearer days, and she had agreed. She had always trusted me with these things. She had always said, even before the dementia made big decisions harder, that Nadia was the organized one. She meant it as a compliment. I was only now understanding how much that quality of mine, the organizing, the managing, the quietly handling things, had also made me invisible as a person to the people who benefited from it. 2 days before the notary appointment, Priya called me. Her voice was different this time, less measured. Something in it had shifted, and it took me a few seconds to identify what the shift was. She was nervous. She asked me if I had retained a lawyer. I told her I had consulted with one, yes. She said she thought that was an escalation. I said I thought filing a formal power of attorney for our mother's protection was appropriate given the current situation. She said she had not been informed. I said she had now been informed. She was quiet for a moment, and then she told me she had also talked to a lawyer. There it was. She said her lawyer had advised her that as a family member with equal standing, she had the right to request a formal accounting of our mother's finances. She said this in a careful, rehearsed way, and I recognized the language because Patricia had already told me this was likely coming. Priya had every legal right to request that accounting. It was her mother, too. But the way she framed it, the tone, the phrasing, the positioning of the call 2 days before my notary appointment told me this was not a daughter asking for transparency. This was a strategic move made on advice of counsel, timed to destabilize the POA process before it was complete. I told her I welcomed a formal accounting. I told her I had already prepared one and it was sitting in her email inbox. She said her lawyer needed to see the originals. I told her I could make originals available through our respective attorneys. She said she thought we should be able to handle this as family. I told her that the moment she called Aunt Curran and the family pastor, we had left the family-only zone. She said nothing for a moment. Then she said she had just been worried about Mom. I said I knew she had said that. I said that I had been taking care of mom for 4 years while she was worried, and that I had the receipts to show it, and from this point forward, all communication about the account and the POA should go through our attorneys. I hung up. My hands were steady. My voice had been steady the whole time. That steadiness surprised me a little. But it should not have, because I had stopped being afraid 2 weeks ago when I realized that the only way to stop being afraid of a false story was to start building a true one. Patricia was pleased with how the call had gone. She said keeping communication through attorneys was the right call. She also told me that she had received a formal letter from Priya's attorney, a man named Gerald Koss, requesting a complete financial accounting of our mother's joint account for the past 18 months, along with all supporting documentation. Patricia smiled when she told me this. She said the letter was actually a gift because what it meant was that every document I had prepared so carefully over the past 18 months, every receipt, every invoice, every log transaction was about to become a matter of record in a legal process. And in a legal process, unlike a family phone call, documents carry weight, documents do not cry, documents do not choose sides, documents simply show what happened. We sent everything, all of it. 411 pages of documentation covering every single transaction in the account from the day it was opened. Patricia also wrote a formal response letter outlining the timeline of the account's creation, the doctor's recommendation, my mother's informed consent, and my role as caregiver during that period. She included a summary of my documented visits, cross-referenced with my mother's medical appointment records, which I had provided. She included a statement from Gloria confirming the regularity of care services. Then we waited. In the meantime, the POA was finalized. My mother signed it on a Friday morning with the notary present, along with Patricia and 2 witnesses. She had a good day. She understood what she was signing. She looked at me afterward and took my hand and said, "You have always been the one I could count on, Nadia." She said it simply, the way she said everything when her mind was clear, like it was just a plain fact about the world. I did not cry in front of her. I cried in the car on the way home. Gerald Koss, Priya's attorney, took 3 weeks to respond to our documentation. When he did, his letter was noticeably shorter and less confident than the first one had been. He acknowledged receipt of the financial records. He said his client was still reviewing the materials. He did not withdraw the request for a formal accounting, but he also did not advance the claim. The letter felt like a person who had expected to find a fire and found a wall of water instead. I thought perhaps that was the end of it. I thought the paperwork had done its job and that Priya would quietly retreat, file the whole episode under a different story in her head, and we would find some stiff, formal version of being sisters that did not involve her making phone calls to the family pastor about my alleged crimes. I was wrong. What happened next I learned about not from Priya, not from an attorney, and not from Aunt Curran. I learned about it from a neighbor. My mother's neighbor on the left side, a retired school teacher named Mrs. Oduya, called me on a Tuesday morning to tell me that she had seen something at my mother's house the previous Saturday that had bothered her enough to pick up the phone. She had seen Priya arrive at the house at around 10 in the morning. She said Priya had a man with her, which she described as someone in a jacket with a clipboard, and that the two of them had been in the house for about an hour. She said she had not said anything at the time because she assumed I must have known. But then she had seen me arrive 2 days later Sunday, and she had noticed that I had looked at the front of the house for a long time before going in and that I had seemed troubled, and so she had decided to call. I thanked her. I asked her if she remembered approximately what time the visit had been. She said around 10, maybe 10:15. I thanked her again. I hung up and immediately opened the security camera app on my phone. What I found on that footage would take me a few minutes to fully understand, and then a few more minutes to understand the full weight of what I was looking at. The interior camera in the hallway showed Priya entering the house with a key on Saturday at 10:14 in the morning. The man with her carried a folder, not a clipboard, and he was wearing a collared shirt, not a jacket. He walked directly down the hallway toward the office. Priya walked with him. My mother could be seen briefly in the living room doorway, looking uncertain, and Priya spoke to her for a moment before guiding her back toward the sofa. Then Priya and the man went into the office and closed the door. They were in the office for 51 minutes. When they came out, the man was carrying the folder differently, thicker now, and he had something tucked under his arm that I recognized after a moment as my mother's green accordion file, the one I kept in the back of the filing cabinet, the one that contained original documents, insurance policies, the deed to the house. My mother's will. He walked out of the house with that accordion file under his arm. I sat very still for a very long time. I called Patricia. I told her what I had seen. I described it in detail, including the times. Tamp from the camera. She asked me if my mother had been aware of who the man was or what he was taking. I said from what I could see on the footage, my mother had been kept in the living room and had not been present when the man left with the documents. Patricia's voice became very quiet and very professional in the way that told me she was no longer in advisory mode. She was in action mode. She asked me if the footage was saved and backed up. I told her yes, to a cloud account. She asked me to send her the raw video files immediately and to do nothing else until I heard from her. I sent the files. Then I drove to my mother's house. My mother did not remember the visit clearly. She said she thought Priya had come by. She said she thought maybe there had been someone with her. She could not tell me what they had taken or discussed. She was having a harder day, and the harder days always made me feel the cruelty of this situation more sharply, because the person at the center of all of this was a woman who could no longer fully protect herself, who trusted the people who came through her door, who could not remember what had been done in her own home. I checked the filing cabinet. The accordion file was gone. The medical correspondence folder had been gone through again. Several other folders had been disturbed. There was no note. There was no explanation. There was nothing to indicate that anyone had sought or received permission to remove original documents from my mother's home. The next morning, Patricia filed an emergency motion. She filed it on the grounds of potential financial elder abuse, a legal term that covers the wrongful taking of an older, vulnerable adult's property or documents by a family member or caregiver. She attached the security footage timestamps as evidence. She also filed for an emergency protective order on my mother's assets, meaning that no transaction, transfer, or change to any document related to my mother's finances or property could be made without court approval. Gerald Koss responded within 48 hours, which told me that Priya had been waiting for something to happen. His response attempted to characterize the visit as a routine family welfare check and said the documents had been taken for safekeeping because his client had concerns about their security. He did not explain why this safekeeping had occurred without my knowledge, without a court order, and without informing my mother. The judge assigned to the emergency motion was not impressed. She granted the protective order within 3 days and also issued a directive requiring the return of all original documents to the court's custody for review. Gerald Koss arranged for the documents to be surrendered. They were. Patricia examined them. The will specifically was a document I had not seen in 2 years, and when Patricia reviewed it against the copy my mother had given me at the time it was originally drafted, something became immediately apparent. The original will had 3 beneficiaries, Nadia, Priya, and the small community center near our childhood home where my mother had volunteered for 15 years. The copy Patricia was now holding had 2. My name had been removed. Patricia showed me this on a Thursday afternoon in her office, sitting across from me at her desk. She showed me the 2 documents side by side. She showed me the dates. The revision on the document in the court's custody bore a notary stamp that was dated 6 weeks prior, around the time the accusations against me had started circulating through the family. I looked at those 2 documents and I felt something I had not felt in a long time, not sadness, not anger, something quieter than both. It was the feeling of finally understanding the whole picture. The phone calls to Aunt Curran and the pastor were not about protecting my mother, they were preparation. They were the foundation of a story designed to make my removal from that will look not just acceptable but necessary. If Nadia had been stealing from mom, then of course Nadia should not inherit. If everyone in the family already believed Nadia had been taking money, then the revised will would not look suspicious. It would look like justice. I sat there in Patricia's office for a moment and then I said, she planned this. Patricia looked at me across the desk and said, the evidence suggests a coordinated effort, yes? I said, how long do you think she had been planning it? Patricia said, the notary stamp is 6 weeks ago, but planning is rarely just 6 weeks. I asked her what happened now. She told me that based on what we had, there were 2 possible paths. We could pursue this civilly, meaning challenge the will modification, present the evidence, and argue it was made without my mother's informed understanding due to her cognitive decline. Or we could report the potential elder abuse to the appropriate authorities and allow the criminal process to determine what, if anything, would follow. She said both were possible. She said only I could decide. I thought about my mother's face on the good mornings. I thought about her saying you have always been the one I could count on. I thought about Priya sitting across from her at that kitchen table with her hands folded, telling her that I had taken something. I thought about my mother crying. I thought about the 51 minutes in that office. I thought about the accordion file walking out the front door under a stranger's arm. I told Patricia I wanted to do both. The civil challenge began immediately. The criminal elder abuse referral went to the appropriate county agency the following week. Patricia coordinated both tracks carefully and methodically. In the meantime, I continued going to my mother's house. I continued taking care of her. I continued paying the bills I had always paid, now under court supervision, which was actually a relief because it meant every transaction was officially reviewed and officially confirmed as appropriate. The court-appointed neutral reviewer looked at 18 months of account records and issued a written statement that all funds had been used appropriately for the benefit of the account holder. That statement was filed with the court. Gerald Koss had gone very quiet, then came the deposition. Priya was deposed 6 weeks after the emergency motion. A deposition is a formal session where a lawyer asks a witness questions under oath and the questions and answers are recorded. Patricia conducted Priya's deposition. I was not in the room, but Patricia told me about it afterward in detail. Patricia had asked Priya about the visit to my mother's house on Saturday morning. Priya said it was a welfare check. Patricia asked who the man with her was. Priya said he was a friend who had driven her. Patricia asked why this friend had carried documents out of the house. Priya said she was not sure what he had taken, maybe just some papers. Patricia asked if she had informed her mother that original estate documents were being removed. Priya said she had mentioned it generally. Patricia then played the security footage. Patricia said there was a long pause after the footage played. Patricia said that Priya's attorney leaned over and spoke to her quietly before she answered the next question. Patricia said the answer Priya then gave was that she had been acting out of concern and had not intended to mislead anyone. The man who had been with Priya, the one who had carried the folder and the accordion file, turned out to be a notary. A private notary who, it later emerged, had also been the notary who had stamped the revised will 6 weeks prior. That notary was now facing his own set of professional questions from the state licensing board, questions that had been triggered by the elder abuse referral. The case did not go to a full criminal trial. What happened instead was a settlement process that took 4 months and resulted in a formal agreement. Priya agreed to return all original documents and acknowledge in writing that no outstanding financial claims existed against me. The revised will was invalidated by the probate court on the grounds that my mother's documented cognitive impairment at the time of revision, combined with evidence that she had not received independent counsel or adequate time to consider the change, meant the revision could not be upheld. My mother's original will, with all 3 beneficiaries, was reinstated. Priya was required to submit to a formal elder financial abuse education program as a condition of avoiding further legal proceedings. Her attorney fees, which had been substantial, were her own to bear. She did not receive any compensation from the process. She did not receive an apology from me either because I did not owe her one. The agreement also included a provision that any future changes to my mother's estate documents required independent legal counsel for my mother, cognitive capacity assessment at the time of signing, and notification to me as power of attorney within 48 hours. That provision was my idea. Patricia included it, the court approved it. It would hold the family found out about the outcome through the quiet channels families use when they have been avoiding a conversation for months. Aunt Curran called me. This time her voice was different. There was no pause after she finished speaking. She apologized, not a large apology, not a dramatic one, but a real one. She said she had listened to the wrong person and she was sorry. I told her I understood. I did not tell her it was fine because it was not entirely fine, but I told her I understood because I did. Cousin Mehak sent a text. The family pastor sent a card. They were all gestures from people who had believed a story without asking me for mine, and they were all people I would hold with a certain gentle distance from that point forward, not out of cruelty, but out of honest recognition that they had shown me something about their instincts in a moment of pressure. Gloria, the home health aide who had quietly noted every visitor, every date, every detail in a small personal log she kept for her own professional records, had her log subpoenaed as supporting evidence. She had said nothing during the months of legal activity other than to confirm what she had observed factually and simply when asked. After everything was over, she came to the house on a regular morning and we had coffee together in my mother's kitchen, and she told me she had always known the account was being managed properly because she had seen what I did every week, the real work, the invisible work, the kind of work that does not get noticed until someone tries to erase it. I thanked her. I meant it completely. My mother had some good days after all of this. She had some hard ones too. That is the nature of where she is in her life right now, and it does not change, and I have stopped waiting for it to change. I show up, I organize, I take care of things, but I do it now with a different understanding of what I deserve in return. I used to think that doing the right thing would eventually be seen and rewarded by the people who mattered. I used to think that being dependable meant being protected. I used to stay quiet because I did not want to create conflict in a family that already had cracks in it. What I know now is that staying quiet when someone is building a lie about you does not keep the peace. It just gives the lie more time to settle. The security camera footage that I installed in my mother's hallway on a Wednesday afternoon for $140 and 2 hours of my time was the thing that changed everything. Not because it caught someone doing something dramatic. Because it showed the truth in a moment when the truth had nowhere else to go. It showed exactly what happened in exactly what sequence with an exact timestamp, and there was nothing anyone could say to make that footage into something it was not. I did not plan a complicated revenge. I did not confront anyone publicly. I did not call the family pastor. I did not send messages to relatives. I documented, I protected, I prepared. And when the moment came, I let the truth walk into that room and do the work that truth is always capable of doing when you have taken care of it properly. Priya and I do not have a relationship now. I will not tell you that is simple or painless because it is neither. She is my sister. She is someone I grew up with, someone I have photographs with, someone whose children call me Auntie Nadia, and who I genuinely love in the uncomplicated way you love children. What Priya did was not a mistake. It was a plan. I have to hold both of those things at once, the love for the life we shared and the knowledge of what she chose to do when she believed no one was watching. I hold it, I carry it. I do not let it make me smaller. My mother asked me once on a morning when she was having a good day and we were sitting on the back porch watching the birds whether I was happy. She said it out of nowhere, the way she sometimes did on clear days, as if her mind had freed itself briefly from the fog and was checking in on the things that really mattered. I told her I was working on it. She nodded like that was exactly the right answer. Then she told me I had always been the steady one. She said it the same way she always had, like it was just a plain fact. I was the steady one. I used to hear that and feel the loneliness in it, the sense of being taken for granted, the exhaustion of reliability. Now I hear it differently, now I hear it as mine. Steady is what kept me standing when everything around me was being pulled sideways. Steady is what kept the receipts filed. Steady is what put the camera in the hallway. Steady is what held the power of attorney in one hand and the truth in the other and walked calmly into that room. I do not need to be thanked for being steady. I just needed to stop letting people use my steadiness against me. And when I did that, when I finally turned all that careful, quiet, organized attention toward protecting myself the way I had always protected everyone else, the story changed. The footage did not lie. It never does, and neither do I. That is the thing about people who build lies carefully, who plan them, who dress them up in soft language and worried tones and folded hands. They forget that the truth also exists. That the truth is also being organized, also being documented, also waiting. They forget that you can be quiet and still be building something. They forget that the steady one has been watching too. I have been watching. I have always been watching, and now they know it. There was a moment very close to the end of the legal process when Priya and I were in the same room for the first time since all of this began. It was a brief procedural meeting at Patricia's office. Priya sat across the conference table from me. She looked different than I expected, smaller somehow, tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. She looked at me once at the beginning and then she did not look at me again. I looked at her, I watched her, I did not feel triumph. I felt something that was harder to name, a kind of grief, I think, for the version of our relationship that had never really existed the way I had believed it did. A sadness for the years I had spent being the one she relied on without her ever learning to respect what that reliance cost me, but underneath the grief, something else. Something clean, something that felt like finally being on the right side of my own life. When we left that office, I walked to my car alone in the late afternoon light. I sat there for a minute before starting the engine. I thought about my mother on the back porch. I thought about the birds. I thought about steady. Then I started the car and drove home. I did not look back. If you have ever been the one who showed up, the one who organized, the one who carried the weight while someone else took the credit or built the story, I want to ask you something in the comments. Did you ever stay quiet to keep the peace, and did keeping the peace protect you, or did it just give someone more time to get comfortable telling lies? Because Nadia stayed quiet for a long time, and this is what she learned. The truth does not need to be loud, it just needs to be saved. Tell me what you would have done differently and whether you think she made the right call.